You know, when you open up the Gospel of Matthew and get to that long genealogy of Jesus, it's easy for your eyes to just glaze over. It seems like just a list of patriarchs and kings. But if you look closely, tucked away in that famous family tree, there's a name that it doesn't seem to belong. And that name tells a story of tragedy, loyalty, and redemption that echoes through all of history.
And that story, it's really hidden in plain sight. It begs this fascinating question. Out of all the people in that sacred lineage, who is the most surprising? Who is the one that makes you stop and go, wait, how did they get in here?
Well, the answer is a woman. And she wasn't just any woman, she was a foreigner from Moab, of all places. Moab was a nation with a long and, frankly, pretty hostile history with Israel. In the ancient world, this didn't just make her an outsider, it basically put her on the wrong team. You just would not expect to find someone from Moab at the very heart of Israel's story.
And there it is, right in Matthew's Gospel. Her name is Ruth, a Moabite woman, listed as the great-grandmother of King David himself. That puts her directly in the ancestral line of the Messiah. So, how on earth did that happen? Okay, let's dive into this story.
Ruth's journey doesn't start with some glorious victory or triumphant moment. Actually, it's the total opposite. Her story kicks off with almost unimaginable loss. To really get why she's so important, we have to start with the tragedy that completely changed the course of her life.
Okay, so picture this. There's a famine, and it forces an Israelite family, a man, his wife Naomi, and their 2 sons, to leave their home in Bethlehem and move to Moab. But things just go from bad to worse. First, Naomi's husband dies. Then, her 2 sons, who had married local Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah, they die too. Suddenly, you have these 3 women, all widows, completely alone in a foreign land.
Naomi is just shattered. She decides to go back home to Bethlehem and tells her daughters-in-law to go back to their own families. And Orpah, crying, does. But Ruth refuses to leave her. She clings to Naomi and makes one of the most powerful vows you'll ever read. She says she will forsake her home, her people, even her own gods, to follow Naomi and embrace the God of Israel. Now, this incredible act of loyalty is the perfect example of a concept that is the engine of this whole story. It's a Hebrew word, hesed. It's a little tough to translate, but it means this deep covenant love, a loyalty and kindness that goes way, way beyond what's expected or required. Ruth's commitment to Naomi, that is pure hesed. So Ruth and Naomi, 2 widows with absolutely nothing, make their way back to Bethlehem. And it's here, in a town whose name ironically means house of bread, that their story gets tangled up with a really important Israelite custom, a custom that's about to change everything for them. To keep them from starving, Ruth goes out to the barley fields to glean, to pick up the leftovers that the harvesters missed. And, you know, it seems like pure chance, but you just get the feeling something bigger is at play here. She ends up in a field belonging to a wealthy and well-respected man named Boaz, who just so happens to be a relative of Naomi's late husband. Boaz had already heard about Ruth's incredible loyalty, her hesed, to Naomi. And he's so impressed that he shows her this extraordinary kindness. He tells his workers to make sure no one bothers her, to leave extra grain for her on purpose. Just like Ruth, Boaz is demonstrating hesed, offering a generosity that goes well beyond what any law required of him.
And this is the turning point. Naomi realizes that Boaz is their Goel Hadam, their kinsman redeemer. This was a critical role in ancient Israel. It meant a close male relative had the duty to rescue a family in crisis. He could buy back their land and even marry a childless widow to make sure the family line didn't die out. For Naomi and Ruth, Boaz is their one shot at redemption.
And Boaz, being the honorable man he is, totally steps up. He fulfills his duty as the kinsman redeemer and marries Ruth. And this one single act of redemption, this marriage between an Israelite man and a foreign widow, it doesn't just save one family. It kicks off a domino effect that will literally forge a royal dynasty and shape the entire future of Israel.
And just look at what happens. I mean, this is incredible. Ruth and Boaz have a son. They name him Obed. Obed grows up and has a son named Jesse. And Jesse becomes the father of David, Israel's greatest king. Just like that, Ruth, the foreigner, the outsider from Moab, becomes the great-grandmother of the entire royal line of Israel. But the story doesn't stop with King David, not even close. The fact that this story is even in the Bible, and that Ruth's name is right there in Matthew's genealogy, tells us that this is all pointing to something much, much bigger.
It's a powerful sign that points directly to Jesus and the promise of the gospel.
See, Ruth's story is this profound theological statement. By grafting a Gentile, a Moabite, into the family line of the Messiah, God is showing that his plan of salvation was never just for Israel. It was for everyone, for all nations. It shows how God works through human acts of hesed to bring redemption out of tragedy. And her inclusion is such a stark contrast to some of the more exclusionary attitudes you find elsewhere in the Old Testament, which just hammers home the point. God's embrace was always meant to be universal.
And this brings us to the final brilliant connection. Boaz acts as what we'd call a type or a foreshadowing of Christ. Think about it. Boaz, through his act of chesed, redeems Ruth and Naomi and secures their family's future. Well, that points us directly to Jesus, the ultimate Redeemer, who, through the ultimate act of God's chesed, redeems all of humanity from sin and death, securing our future in God's family.
The story of Ruth and Boaz really shows how these seemingly small acts of loyalty and just extraordinary kindness can have an impact that ripples out for generations. It really leaves us with something to think about, right? What acts of faithfulness and loving kindness in our own lives, no matter how small they seem, might God be using to shape a future that we can't even begin to imagine?